Good morning, everybody, or afternoon, depending on which part of the country you're coming from. Welcome to meeting 33 of the GovAI Coalition Readiness and Adoption Committee. I'm Rich Oppenheim, Deputy Executive Director at Regional Government Services and one of the co-leads of this committee, along with Zahara Noor from the City of Detroit. We're glad to have you with us today. As usual, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, as we've been doing already. Give us your name, your agency, where you're joining from. We always appreciate an active chat, and we'll use that space to share any ideas and links and resources and questions throughout the session. So today's meeting will be focused primarily on our speaker series. We'll spend about 30 minutes with our guest speaker, Alton Henley, who's on the call, followed by 15 to 20 minutes of Q&A and discussion. I also want to reserve the final few minutes to briefly discuss a speaker need for an upcoming Innovate US webinar series that the Coalition is partnering on. But our agenda today is really simple. First, sort of welcome and introductions, which we're walking through now, and then I'll do a brief introduction to our speaker today. Then we'll do the presentation and Q&A. So for anyone new to the Readiness and Adoption Committee, the meeting on the first Wednesday of every month is dedicated primarily to ongoing project work of our various working groups. The second meeting on the third Wednesday of every month is focused on a guest speaker, and this speaker series is designed to bring in voices, research, and field experience that can help public agencies move from AI interest to responsible AI readiness and adoption. And our committee's work focuses on helping governments prepare their workforce, adopt governance practices, engage communities, and make AI adoption more accessible and actionable across agencies. Today's topic fits really squarely within that purpose because it asks the question we need to keep coming back to: are the resources, models, and conversations we're building actually usable? So I am very pleased to introduce today's speaker, Alton Henley from Montgomery College. Alton is the Dean of Business and Hospitality at Montgomery College in Maryland and brings more than 20 years of IT experience to this conversation. He has authored a book on Ready or Not, City Manager's Guide to AI and Local Government, and is the creator of the City Ready platform, which helps local governments assess their AI readiness. His work draws on ICMA survey data from more than 600 communities to better understand how local governments are navigating the AI transition and where they may be getting stuck. So today, Alton will present the overlooked majority, why smaller agencies get left out of the AI conversation, and how to close that readiness gap. So Alton, thank you so much for joining us. We're really looking forward to this conversation. Before Alton begins and I turn it over to him, just a few quick ground rules. Please feel free to use the chat throughout the presentation to share reactions, examples, questions. We'll monitor the chat and try to pull those questions into the Q&A portion of that to help Alton get through the core presentation. Let's hold longer comments and pauses until the Q&A, unless there really are clarifying questions that need to be addressed right away. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to Alton and let him proceed with his presentation. And Alton, let me know if for some reason you can't share, and we'll get that turned on.
Yes, I can. Thank you. So let me do this.
Thank you for that clarification, Alton.
And can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. Good afternoon. As Rich said, my name is Alton Henley, and in the next 30 minutes, I'm going to argue against the data set that my book was built on, and the same data set that most people cite when they talk about where local government stands. And the argument that I'm making is that we've been measuring the wrong country. 635, that was the ICMA sample. If you've read anything about AI adoption in American local government in the last 2 years, you've probably read something derived from those 635 responses, including mine. So let's ask a question that nobody seems to ask about this data set. Who answered it? Now, one note on vocabulary, because I'm about to accuse the field of overgeneralizing, and I'd rather not do it myself on the way in. My data is cities. Of the 635, 541 are municipalities. 63 are counties, 12 are townships, and 19 didn't say. not state agencies, not special districts, not school districts. The title says agencies, and I'll keep using it because I think the mechanism travels. And some of you can tell me whether it does. But the composition numbers I'm about to give you are the 541 cities, so they're like for like against the census count of cities. Where I say agencies, I'm extrapolating. I went back to the raw file and I computed the sample composition. The median city in the ICMA sample sits in the $10,000 to $25,000 resident band. However, I'm sorry, I need to move the pictures out of my way. However, the respondent pool, the median population in the respondent pool was the 10,000 to 25,000 resident band. But the median band for the US municipality is 1,000 to 2,500. So put it another way, the 11% of the cities in this sample under 25,000, 65% of American municipalities are that small. So the segment of local government that makes up the most of this country appears in our primary data set at about 1/6 of its actual weight. And I want to be careful about this claim because I'm not saying that ICMA did anything wrong. It was a very well-run survey, and they disclosed these facts themselves. The figure is printed in the introduction to their own summary report. The disclosure was made, it's just that the rest of us didn't really act on it. Every survey has a response profile. The problem is we've collectively forgotten that this one does, and we now describe its findings as the state of American local government in totality. And nothing about this data set looks wrong from the inside. The distortion only becomes visible when you stop asking what the respondents said and start asking who they were. And almost nobody asked that second question because the first one is where all the interesting findings are. Why does the sample look like this? And start with a question I didn't think to ask. Who was even asked? The ICMA maintains a survey database of local governments broader than their membership. For the 2018 Form of Government survey they published, exactly what was in it. 12,761 governments broken out by population band. And the table is the most useful thing published about this data set, and I don't think many people have read it. Here's what's in it. Communities under 2,500 are 14% of ICMA's database, but they're 65% of American municipalities. So the skew doesn't begin when someone decides not to answer. It begins in the frame before anyone is asked anything. And that's a different problem from a low response rate. Non-response we can correct for. If we know who declined, we can weight what we have. Coverage, you can't because there's no data at all about the governments that aren't in the frame. Not a bigger sample, it's not a bigger instrument. Now here's the number I'd like you to walk away with. In that same survey mailed to the clerks, addressed to the clerks, the communities under 2,500 answered at 40%, the highest response rate of any size band in the study. The lowest was the biggest cities. I think some of us have had this backwards. We assume that small towns, and by extrapolation, small agencies are hard to reach. They are not. If we mail the person in charge and we address it to them, they answer better than anyone else. The one caveat, and I'd rather say it than have someone ask it, that's the 2018 survey about form of government, which was mailed to the clerks. Those response rates didn't transfer, but to contrast that, the ICMA AI study wasn't addressed to clerks. It was addressed to the CAO. And when the survey went out, the communities under 2,500 were 11% of the cities that answered. But 92% of those people who answered were the CAO. It's the same association, the same database. But when you change the addressee, the small towns disappear. So who does answer an AI survey? Two things select them, and both select the same way. The first is written into the instrument. Look at the survey's role question. There's 5 options: Chief Administrative Officer, Chief Information Officer, Chief Innovation Officer, Information Technology Director, and other. There's no clerk and no mayor on the list. So when we go back to that town of 1,400, it has none of those first 4 positions. Its senior administrative employee is a clerk. And her honest answer to that question is other or nothing at all. And many of them just didn't answer the survey. The second thing is what it costs to show up. Now, a survey, it takes about an hour. And small towns have demonstrated that when it's addressed to them, they're willing to spend that hour. But a pilot takes months. A working group needs a job with room in it for something else to be assigned. A conference needs a travel budget and someone that can cover your desk while you're gone. Which is also why the gap I showed you is something that I think is something that isn't really well addressed by us. Every one of these selects for the agencies with Slack, and the agencies without Slack are precisely the ones that our readiness gap is about. Even inside the under 5,000 group in this sample, 62% employed a professional manager of the ones that responded. Those aren't typical small towns. They're the best resourced end of small towns. Why does that matter? We are building our resources from what we learn. And what we learn comes from the agencies that show up. So the resources get calibrated to the agencies that show up, and the agencies that didn't show up get handed guidance they can't use, which teaches them that this field has nothing for them, so they don't tend to come back. That's not a survey problem. It's a feedback loop, and everyone in this meeting is inside of it. Now, you know the headline findings, so I'll be brief with it. ICMA asked what's blocking AI adoption. Of the 574 who answered the question, 77% said lack of awareness and understanding. 10% more or less said political resistance, which is 8-1. But that 77% is 77% of the governments who are in the frame. And we just saw what the frame looks like. What's the number for the municipalities that were never in it? It isn't in the data. It can't be. But there's no plausible story where the rate is higher. So 77% is not an estimate of the knowledge gap. It's the floor. And every number I show you for the rest of this talk is our best case guess. And so before we split by size, let's look at the absolute number, because that's one that people skip past. 69%, as of the point of this survey, had taken no governance action on AI of any kind. The survey offered 6 things they could have done, and the bars on the right show how many did each one. Hired or appointed AI staff, 10%. An organization-wide policy, 9. A committee, 6. A budget line, 5.5. Organization-wide training, 4.5. And a resolution from the governing body at that time, 0.6%. That's 4. 4 governing bodies in the entire sample had passed a resolution on AI. And 7 in 10 had done nothing at all about technology that's already sitting in software that they own, whether or not anyone has decided anything about it. Now, when we split it by size, under 5,000, 2% have an organization-wide AI policy. 5,000 to 25,000, 7%, 25,000 to 100,000, 10%, over 100,000, 25%, which is a 12-1. The policy gap between the smallest community and the largest community is 12-1. And remember what we told you about the small end of that table. It's built from the small governments that were in the frame at all. The real floor is actually lower than this. Now, the instinct is to read that as a maturity curve, is to believe that large cities, and by extrapolation, large agencies are ahead, and small cities, and by extrapolation, small agencies are behind, and everybody is on the same road at a different speed. The problem is a city of 1,400 is not 3 years behind a city of 200,000. It's not going to magically develop a procurement department in 3 years. It's not going to hire a data governance lead. It is not early. It is structurally different. The unit of capacity in a town of 1,400 is 1 person with 6 jobs. Any solution that requires a 7th is not a solution. That is not a readiness problem you can solve with a maturity model. So who have we been writing for? Everything our field publishes assumes capacity. Model policies assume legal review. Procurement guidance assumes a procurement function. Bias auditing assume someone who can read and audit. None of it's bad work, and I've contributed to some of it, but all of it is calibrated to the represented minority. Take an American municipality at the national median, call it 1,400 people. The whole organization is 5.5 people: a clerk, a public works director, a half-time finance person, a police chief with 2 officers, and an unpaid mayor who has another job. This is not an extreme case I went looking for. This is the middle of the distribution. One of those 5.5 people is going to end up owning this function, and it will always be the clerk. She already owns the records, the minutes, the agendas, and every process no one else wanted. So let's follow her. Now, we hand her our standard AI governance package, and the model policy asks her to designate an AI governance officer. But there's no candidate. Every name on that org chart is already at capacity, including hers. The vendor evaluation checklist asks her to require model documentation and audit rights in the contract. She's buying a subscription to OpenAI or Claude or some other tool for $20, $50, $100 a month with a click-through agreement. There's no contract to amend. The bias audit framework asks her for pre-deployment testing against protected classes. She has no data scientists, no data, no test set, and a population where any subgroup analysis has an N small enough to be meaningless. The pilot framework asks her for a steering committee and a baseline metric, and she has neither. So here's what I want you to notice. Not one of those is a knowledge failure. She could read every document we publish, understand all of it, and still not be able to comply with a single requirement. For the represented cities, it's an education problem. For the median American municipality, it's a design problem, and it's ours. So what does she actually do? And I have some experience with this. She does one of 3 things. She asks the vendor, who's the only party in this transaction with access to an engineer, a series of white papers, and the time to get on a call. And the vendor will tell her that it's fine. And sometimes it actually is. She'll ask a peer, she'll call the clerk in the next town over, who has exactly the same information that she has, and they reassure each other. And that's the most common path. And that's why bad practice propagates laterally through small government faster than good practice propagates down from us. Or she does nothing, and the decision gets made for her by a checkbox and a software update she was never told about. So there's 3 paths, and almost everything was written for a 4th path, one that requires a person she doesn't have. That's not a failure of effort. It's a failure of who was in the room, which brings me back to who answered the survey. I want to show you the other end of the spectrum and then tell you why it matters for the small end. Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, 2016. Roughly 1.2 million residents. They built the Allegheny Family Screening Tool, a predictive model to help caseworkers prioritize children at risk of maltreatment. It runs on a data warehouse the county has been building since 2001, integrating 10 local school systems, the courts, the jail, both housing authorities, Medicaid, and behavioral health. Every referral scored 1 to 20. They did everything right. They published a methodology, they commissioned independent ethical review, they invited external researchers, they engaged their critics. Virginia Eubanks, one of the sharpest critics of algorithmic decision-making in this country, said Allegheny did every single thing that progressive folks who talk about these algorithms have asked people to do. And it's still disproportionately flagged in low-income families. The reason is worth holding on to. The model drew on public system records, welfare, Medicaid, jail bookings, public housing. And families on Medicaid generate public government records. Families with private insurance don't. Families in public housing generate government records. Homeowners don't. The algorithm wasn't just measuring risk. It was also essentially measuring their children's visibility to government. Now, the obvious point is, if Allegheny failed, what hope does a small town have? And that's a little ridiculous. A town of 1,400 is never building a family screening tool. Here's the real point. Look at where our best thinking has gone. The deepest, most contested work in this field, the bias auditing, the algorithmic accountability, the impact assessments, is aimed at systems like Allegheny's. Tier 3 systems. the systems of consequence. And it should be, because that's where people get hurt worst if things go wrong. But it's aimed at systems that maybe 200 American local governments will ever build, while 19,000 of them are about to click accept on a tier 1 or tier 2 feature in software they already own. And the guidance for that decision is thin and scattered and mostly written by the vendor. The 200 largest cities get a library to help them. The 19,000 smaller ones, the vast majority, just get a Post-it note. And that's what the blind spot costs us. One failure, and I picked an ordinary one on purpose. New York City's chatbot told owners they could legally take employers' tips. And that's the one I'll hold on to because it's a tier 2. It's not a high risk, a chatbot answering routine questions. New York City, though, has one of the largest municipal technology organizations in the country and more AI governance staff than most states have. They still shipped a bot that told business owners they could break the law under the city's own logo, and it stayed up even after it hit the news. Not to pick on New York, because it sets a ceiling on what we can expect from process. The best staffed municipal technology organization in the country could not reliably get a tier 2 deployment right on the first try. So adopt the governance framework is not a sufficient answer for a town of 5.5 employees. Something else has to carry the weight. And the only candidates above the agency level are organizations like this one. Renee Cummings at the University of Virginia put it best. These weren't technical glitches. They were devastating design decisions. So let's take a look at what worked. Tyler Cameron is the city recorder in Providence. Like most recorders in a city that size, he also runs elections, records requests, legal notices, and municipal code. Minutes were eating him alive. In spring 2024, he started using an AI transcription tool, and the tool produces a rough draft after he uploads the recording and the agenda. He edits it into minutes, and nothing reaches the public that he hasn't read first. Now, whether we go by what we put in the paper, which said he got to save half a day on some meetings, or what the vendor said that 7 to 8 hours spent per meeting went down to 2 to 3 hours, the impact is essentially the same. He's saving somewhere between 4 hours to half a day on every meeting's minutes without putting anyone at risk. Now, nowhere was it published what the actual cost and the annual total was, but assuming that they have weekly meetings and then one meeting to cap off the year, they have 53 meetings like so many other places do, 4 hours times 50 meetings a year, he's saving 200 hours a year, roughly 5 man weeks of effort that is saved. And he didn't find this through a framework or a conference or anything published by an organization like this one. He heard about it from other clerks at a League of Cities and Towns dinner. And that's the peer channel that we were talking about from slide 10, the one that I said spread bad practice laterally. It also spreads good practice laterally. And it's the real distribution network for the overlooked majority. And almost nothing we write is built to travel through it. So notice what Providence didn't need. They didn't need an RFP. They didn't need a consultant. They didn't need procurement. They didn't need a governance framework or a pilot methodology. It needed a recorder with a problem and a peer who'd already solved it. His own caveat is better than anything I'd write for him. He says, I haven't seen any downsides so far, but it's still our responsibility as users to not rely completely on AI. So the question I put to any resource that we publish is not, is this good, but would this have helped Providence or would have stopped them? Because a sufficiently thorough readiness framework handed to a recorder with 6 other jobs is functionally a stop sign. One thing before I get to the ask and I let you go, and this is the thing I want the room most to hear. Not now is a legitimate decision, especially for cities and agencies of the size that we're talking about. If an organization is at its earliest stage across most of what we would assess as far as their readiness is concerned, deployment is premature. If governance overhead exceeds any plausible productivity benefit, and for a team of 8 or a team of 5.5, it genuinely might be, waiting is correct. The one thing I ask is that it be an actual decision rather than a default. Let them make the decision and document it. A one-page memo saying what they assessed, what they concluded, what would change their mind, and when they'll revisit it. And here's why I'm saying it to you specifically. Our field, and I'm as guilty of this as anyone, our default posture treats non-adoption as a deficit to be corrected. Every maturity model and every readiness scorecard has an implicit arrow pointing towards adoption. And for a large share of American local government, not now is the right answer. And our resources should say so out loud instead of scoring it as a failure. So I want to end on where I began, on knowledge, because that's the part of what is going to make this actually solvable. A knowledge gap is solvable by an organization like this one, and it's only solvable for the agencies our resources reach. One offer first, because I shouldn't show up and only assign homework. I've built a free readiness assessment for municipalities, and it works very well for municipalities under 7,500 because that's the tier nobody measures. 35 questions, 15 minutes, free to every city in the world, and it will stay free. More importantly, I'll publish the aggregate results back to this field on a regular schedule. I'm hoping that if we can reach the small governments and we can get a better picture of where they actually are and where they're actually lacking in specifics, we can help them better. It's at aiready.cityready.org, which is on the slide, and it's on the last slide too, so you don't have to write it down now. So I have 4 asks. 2 sit inside this committee's remit, and the other 2 you might have to carry up to the full coalition. Number 1, put a capacity label on every resource you publish, on the face of the document, not in the appendix. Say, this template assumes legal review, you need a designated technology staff member and a negotiated contract. Put it on the front the way the dosage goes on a prescription bottle. Right now, those assumptions are essentially invisible. So an agency or a city that can't meet them concludes that it failed rather than it was handed the wrong document. 1 line per resource. 2, publish a version of your core resources written for that equivalent of the 5.5 FTEs. Not a simplified version, a different document with different assumptions. No legal review, no IT staff, click through procurement, because that's where most of our smallest governments live. 1 person who also does 3 other jobs. If the honest answer there is don't adopt this class of tool, the document should say so plainly. This is more useful to them than a checklist they can't complete. Now, these last 2 you might have to take upward. Ask the researchers to address the instrument to a job that exists and to report by size. The first is the cheapest fix in this talk. When the ICMA wrote to clerks, the smallest communities answered at 40%. A role question offering only CAO, CIO, and Chief Innovation Officer excludes most American local governments before the first real question. And while it's possible that other 30% never opened the survey, at least some of them did open it, saw that first question, and figured, this is for me, I've got other things to do. The second is easier than it sounds because the ICMA already does it. For the form of government survey, they publish the frame, the size breakdown, and the per band response rates. But they didn't do it for the AI survey. You're just asking for parity with their own practice, not a new standard. And fourth, report your own membership by agency size against the national distribution. You can't fix representation you don't measure. And as far as I know, no organization in this field publishes it. You could be the first. You may not like the result, and that's the point. A coalition whose membership mirrors the survey bias will reproduce the survey's blind spot in everything it produces. So that's ask 1. You can see it right here on the screen. And I'll describe it rather than read it to you. On the left is the model policy the way we publish it today. And on the right is the same document with 1 line on its face. Not a rewrite, not a simplification. 1 line that says what the document assumes and where to go if you don't have it. That's the whole ask. It costs a sentence per resource, and it converts a document that currently makes a small agency feel like a failure into one that they can decline on purpose. I opened by saying I would argue against my own evidence base, and here's the argument. The central finding holds. The primary barrier is knowledge. not politics, not budget, not ideology. What I got wrong was the confidence. I described the state of American local government from a data set in which most of American local government is barely present, and then helped to write guidance for a reader who mostly doesn't exist. So did a lot of people. The overlooked majority isn't overlooked because anyone chose to overlook them, and it isn't because they won't answer. If we mail the clerk, she answers better than anyone. They're overlooked because they never got on the list, and because everything we asked for after the survey costs staff they don't have. We built our picture of this field out of people who could afford to be in it. The clerk with 6 hats isn't the exception in American local government, not the edge case, not the long tail. She is the median. Everything we publish should be legible to her, and almost nothing we publish is. Thank you. I'll spend the rest of the time on your questions if you have any, and I would particularly like to hear from anyone who thinks I read this data wrong.
Alton, thank you so much. You walked us through a lot of information and really,
Sorry.
no, it's really helpful. This is the stuff we love to see, and we love to hear this kind of thought because it really does challenge us in terms of, what we're doing as a committee, as a coalition, and how we're best able to position and help people across all agency sizes. So I think it's really helpful information for us to absorb and digest and think about. So I do want to open the floor to questions and reactions if you have them. So feel free to raise your hand and unmute if you want to ask Alton a question or give any commentary on what you've heard today.
Slide 17.
To return to slide 17.
Okay. Reshare. This one?
Patrice, do you have a question about this slide, or did you just want to see it again?
I just wanted to see it again. I missed it.
Okay.
Okay.
Great. Any other reactions from the group?
Yeah, I was just wondering if we could get a copy of the assessment or the report. Because when I'm teaching classes, I always refer people out to resources. And this sounds like something that'd be great for folks to have an opportunity to look at as they're adopting AI.
Certainly. I will send the deck and the report, the assessment to Rich for distribution to the rest of you. I'm sorry, Albert, I see your hand.
Yeah, thanks, Alton, and thanks for just doing this presentation. It's been eye-opening. I was seeing in the chat as the conversation was going, there seems to be this I don't know if it's dichotomy, but basically you've got on one hand, there's a lot of AI tools that are meant to save time, or that's their
Right.
proposition, right? Like the meeting minutes, helping write memo, blah, blah, blah. And then there is the amount of capacity that it takes to put this governance in place. And I'm wondering,
Right.
and I'd also love to hear, especially from folks on the call that have been thinking about this or working in governments, presumably an investment in the AI tool saves time to help figure out the overhead of the AI tool. But there's a certain bit of a chicken and an egg situation to get the right rules in place, while at the same time you need time for those rules. And so, some of the use cases might be useful first. I was just curious, if you've seen examples or how that might be successfully thought about, especially when it's like a clerk and 4 people.
I'll jump in first if I can. What I've seen, and I was kind of shocked by it, and people seem to be a little hungry for, is I've run into a lot of cities that were too small for a consultant. However, they do have a problem that they need solved, be it minutes or changing their website software from using Facebook to using something else. And all they can go by is what they've heard. And they would love if there was an organization, and I don't know if this one would be the proper one, or ICMA or whoever, that could sit there and basically tell them, if you're trying to build a website, there's Civic Plus, Granicus, and these two other ones. And if what you're trying to do is X and all you have is minutes and these three departments, this one's probably the best choice for you. And I realize that that might seem like a conflict of interest or what have you, but otherwise, literally, all they're going to go with is whatever vendor contacted them with the best sales job, whatever they were using before, or like I said, literally whoever's in the city next to them that they normally talk to. And the same thing for minute software or what have you. If there was some kind of blessed list, and then they could be checked behind and say, on a regular basis, we're taking a look to make sure that you are safekeeping the data the way that you said you would, that you haven't added anything extra into the contract. An organization that actually has the capacity to have legal review could do the legal review for these smaller agencies and cities, and God even knows how much money would be saved, much less how much extra capability would be added to those smaller organizations. Yes, Alice, I agree 100%. And that's my viewpoint, Albert, but I would welcome to hear what anybody else has to say about that.
I like that idea because we've talked about sort of, what we do around training is sort of that mix of curation of resources and developing resources, and, creating some sort of matrix or linkage to, like, here's what I'm trying to accomplish, here's the level of complexity I need, and then
Right.
there are some paths to do that, right?
Right.
So that's really interesting. I also wanted to sort of comment that, I've been thinking a lot about assessing agencies across these spectrums, like size, right? Like, I love what you talked about size.
Right.
It seems like the other spectrum is maturity around where they are in their AI adoption journey. So it's like they could appear in various places on either one of those two spectrums.
Right.
And that we somehow use those two spectrums to sort of help guide people to where they are, like if that's a maturity model or an agency assessment model. I just like the idea of that, like, how can we pinpoint where somebody is and then point them to what they need, based on the answer to those two identifying, variables. So
I see Rick's hand. I don't know if we have time, but
just real quickly, I found this really interesting. I mean, I'm not from government, and but I run the training working group, and our goal is to come up with unified training that any agency could adopt, and we don't really pay much attention to size. But one thing I've noticed is that even in larger municipalities, there might be one person who's like the AI person for that city, and you hear about these. Like one of our more advanced users, or AI adopters, was pointing out like that cities were to enable themselves to be AI ready. They were trying to fan out and get everybody a co-pilot license or things like that were quite expensive, and but your core point of finding the very specific use cases that are working. One of the things that I think we haven't been doing great in the coalition, I haven't spent as much time in the use cases committee as I want, but I know that in the training working group, we run into challenges of just knowing how much adoption there is. Like we put playbooks out that are like, here's a curriculum you can use, or here's how you can get started, but we don't really know how much that's actually having an impact and people are running with that. And the same thing, like you described a really concrete use case, and it would be neat if there was some polling mechanism that was properly implemented such that the right people would respond to it, but they could actually say, show us some bubbles of which use cases are really penetrating, and then do a little bit more to guide people to those or tune those, and then see if there are different flavors of those use cases for different scales of cities. So that's my thought.
And if I can add in, someone has said it's very extrapolatable. It very much is. Like even my college has a $750 million a year budget. I have about 100 faculty in my area, And the idea that our problems are the same as a college that only has 100 faculty, period, is absolutely ludicrous. And we can afford to make decisions. And we have 7 people on our IT security team. So we can afford to make decisions that might blow back on us a little bit. Whereas the school, where they don't really have a security guy of their own, they're borrowing somebody from the county. So if there's a problem, it's something that it'll take them a week to answer. They're in a much more precarious position than we are. But because colleges like mine are easier to study, almost all of the research on the need for technology at colleges is colleges of my size, and not colleges of the size where it actually would be a life or death decision for them. And we can extrapolate that to cities, to counties, to agencies. It's like, what is the old joke? The person is looking for their lenses, and they're looking where the light is because that's where it's brightest. But it's almost certainly somewhere else because you've already looked here. Yes, Lan?
Thank you. Eye-opening indeed. I have a question that I've been struggling with, just understanding, say, larger sizes governments versus smaller sized governments, etc. So the gaps have been there. Everyone knows. But as a society, who is tasked with, who is supposed to pick up the gap? Is it just out of people's good hearts, or that the federal government does allocate some funding to help local governments, but knowing the cybersecurity world, it's just minuscule in comparison to the needs, and about the goodwill of spreading word about tested or proven solutions. I know that even, say, in the state of California, the state government has a law in place encouraging public agencies to adopt co-op agreements.
Okay.
So that smaller governments can just piggyback on the proven solutions without having to go through the entire starting process, RFP, etc. But the adoption is just very low. So I think from my own thinking, it seems to me that it bubbles down ultimately to which organizations are given the responsibility to help the agencies that are left behind, or is really just entirely left to the good hearts of people?
That's a very good question, and I was surprised to hear what part of the answer is. So, a colleague of mine used to be the city manager of Eudora in Kansas, and he was telling me that there are these informal groups that meet in the regions of the state of Kansas, and it's just the city. Sometimes the city manager, sometimes the city clerks from the local municipalities coming together near the northwest, northeast, southwest, and southeast quadrant of the state. And it's this informal network. It's not a membership organization. They don't take dues. They don't have funding, but they get together like once a quarter or so, and they just sit there and talk about what's going on. And that's what I was talking about. This informal network, I guess we don't have to, but it would be very beneficial if we could find a way to insert ourselves into that network. And they probably exist differently in every state, but that's how we would get people to pick up the idea that, Civic Plus, or maybe even just regular WordPress, would be a useful solution to most cities' website problem. And it's going to cost them $30 a month versus the $1,800 a year they're paying the company that somebody signed up with 7 years and 2 administrations ago that nobody understands. But it's easier than switching it and potentially losing the capabilities that we have. And as far as why I think it's because they're largely invisible. They're invisible at the state level because of voting. Like generally speaking, it's far more powerful to solve the city of LA's problems than it is for some municipality on the other side of the state. Nobody's going to hear that you did it, and their issues are very, very different. And I'm not saying that nobody cares. It's just I think it looks like, oh, I'm solving the bigger problem because there's several million people here and there's only 1,000 people there. And even though we know it, it's like one of those things, our minds really aren't set up to wrap our heads around the fact there are 19,000. Well, let's put it a different way. There's 18,000 small cities in the United States, and we're ignoring almost all of them. And I can only imagine how it is with the agencies. You know, everybody's paying attention to the Tennessee Valley Authority, but to the Rockville Watershed Water. I don't even know if it's called an authority, but there's like 7 people that work there, and I don't think they have a defined IT guy. I think the guy that did the tour for us actually functions as the IT guy because he knows a little bit about computers. But how do you get that organization to be a part of a larger organization and get somebody from there to go to a meeting for 2 days? It's a tough one.
Yeah. Alton, you said,
sorry, I could go on for hours about this.
Yeah, we'd love to hear it too. But you said early in your presentation that ICMA was, had acknowledged some issues with their design and the responses that they got. Do you know if they're planning to sort of redo this survey and redesign that in any way?
I don't know that. I have been beating this drum, and they were actually at the last time I gave this talk. But it's kind of, I guess, above the pay grade of any of the people that were there. The issue being that it's given the number of people that they surveyed. Granted, only 600 some odd responded, but they sent the information out to 12,000.
Yeah.
And then to say, well, the 7,000 you didn't send it out to are the smallest, most vulnerable. So you need to do it again, and you need to try twice or 3 times as hard to get them to answer, is kind of a tough thing to say. And it would cost substantially more than they probably spent. When I tried to figure out what it would cost for me to do the study, I could redo the study that they did for probably 30 or 40,000 to reach everybody, or at least at a representative rate, would probably cost like 200 grand, because you would need to have people calling individual cities directly to make sure that you get their response. And that kind of makes it clear why it probably hasn't been done yet.
Yeah, really interesting. I don't know what our inroads in with ICMA are, but I was thinking, is there something we could do to partner with them in some way to sort of get some more robust data that would be helpful, not just to us, but to agencies?
Yes, definitely. Definitely. Well, thank you so much for your time. I know you guys have other stuff to talk about today, but I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. And I will, as soon as I sign off, I'll send this email to you, Rich, with the deck and the links to the assessment and what have you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alton. And as usual, I will include all of this information in the post-meeting follow-up. And appreciate your time today, Alton, and all this great information that you've shared with us. And looking forward to potentially having you come back at some point, giving us an update on anything you've learned. So
certainly, no problem at all.
Great.
Thank you. You folks have a good day.
All right. Okay, thank you everybody for giving Alton some of our time today and for the conversation that happened after the session. I have a brief follow-up here on an ask from Innovate US. Let me just share my screen here if I can find it. Just a second. My share button was gone. I found it. So for those of you who don't know, we've been looking to partner with Innovate US for some time and think about how our 2 agencies can work together. what's happened is we're partnering with them on a November webinar series. It's about worker-centric AI adoption for the public sector. And they really have speaker need for this first session about talking to your workers and trust before technology. They're looking for government managers, agency leaders, labor management teams who have navigated AI adoption in public sector, people that are sort of focused on negotiating protections through collective bargaining or just building joint oversight structures or designing new systems. With additional topics that are already filled are the November 2nd session on governance with workers and building joint frameworks, and a session on November 10th on building AI with your workforce and workers as co-designers. But if you or anybody else in your agencies you think would be really helpful at talking in this session about talking with your workers, trust before technology, that would be great. They're trying to fill this relatively soon. So if you have any ideas or people in mind, surface those to me if you can. And I'll include this link in the post-meeting follow-up, but it gives you an idea of not only what they're trying to accomplish with the overall series, but also sort of a breakdown of what each of these are, and what they're trying to accomplish in each one of these sessions. Just for now, I know Alice and Sahur, who are part of our coalition, are going to be speakers for session 2, and myself and somebody from New Jersey are going to be in session 3. So we're, in this partnership, we're really looking for resources that can, from the GovAI Coalition, that can help sort of address this first session on October 26th. But we're very excited about this prospect of working with them, and really eager to see how that evolves. So if you have any ideas or you want to raise your hand, we'd love to hear it. You can just send me an email and I will get you connected with Innovate US and the representatives there. With that, we have a few minutes at the end of the day here. If there's anybody that has any thoughts, questions, any other updates they want to give in the last few minutes we have, that would be great. If not, I'm not hearing anything. If not, I know you've heard a lot of information today. I'll leave you to go and absorb that and think. And, we'd love, sometimes we hear a lot of the speaker content and, it's like a rush of information, and I'll have some time in the next meeting for us to process or think about things that we might have thought about, since this presentation. And I know I'm going to be looking through this data because I thought he presented some really interesting data points for us to think about. And, if you do that between this and the next meeting, there'll be some time to reflect in the next meeting. So really looking forward to hearing any feedback you have about this after digesting the information. So with that, I am going to say thank you for coming. Thank you for giving Alton your time. Thank you for all the interesting, great comments today. And looking forward to seeing you on the first Wednesday in September. That doesn't seem possible for our project group check-ins. So thank you so much for today.
Thank you, Richard. Well done.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rich. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.